Hey, how's it going, guys? Mr. Binder here. This is the second part of Chapter 9, Homeostasis and Introduction. The first part of the chapter that we spoke about was negative feedback mechanisms and then thermoregulation and how a negative feedback loop was incorporated to help maintain internal temperature. Now again, a couple things belong to a negative feedback. There needs to be some sort of stimulus, whether it's internal or external from the environment, so in our body or outside of our body. There needs to be a sensor to sense that stimulus, all right, generally our nerve endings that will send that signal up to our brain. The integrator here is the hypothalamus, a region of our brain that will take the information and kind of figure out what's going on if there's something out of whack. And then once it takes that information and integrates it, it'll send it again down our nervous system to an effector. And that effector could be a variety of things, an organ. It could be a muscle. It could be an organ system. It could be a gland, an endocrine gland. It could be an exocrine gland. There's a lot of things that occurs when the hypothalamus sends out a message to an effector, and in hopes of maintaining what's known as homeostasis, or a balance. All right. So this next part, what we're going to take a look at is water balance. Again, it's controlled by a negative feedback mechanism, and you will have to describe this negative feedback mechanism on the test. And basically, it's this right here. What happens when our water balance is out of whack? Well, this is where the excretory system comes into play, or more or less the kidneys. You guys are probably more familiar with the kidneys. You might not have heard the excretory system before, but the kidneys play an important role in maintaining water balance. Again, the kidneys' role is to form urine, but the kidneys can balance how much urine is formed. And in terms of concentration, whether it's highly concentrated urine or if it's not or diluted solution of urine. All right, now the kidneys will help to maintain blood volume. We have about 5 liters of blood at any given time. So our kidneys will help to maintain blood volume as well as electrolyte water balance. And we'll talk about that. Again, the kidneys help to maintain total body water, which is about 70% of our total body weight. And we can break up total body water into two things here. Extracellular fluid, which makes up about 15 liters of total body water, and then intracellular fluid. Okay? The difference between the two is intracellular fluid is the fluid that's inside of our cells. Extracellular fluid is any fluid that's outside of our cells. All right, again, taking a look at that, extracellular fluid makes up about 33% of our total body water, and intracellular fluid makes up about 66% of total body water. Extracellular fluid, again, just maintaining or continuing to talk about this topic here. Extracellular fluid is broken up into a couple different things. We have interstitial fluid, and we've got blood, plasma, and lymph. These items here is what comprises the extracellular fluid. All right, and what does the interstitial fluid do? Well, interstitial fluid means that it's any fluid that surrounds tissues and cells. It fills spaces between cells and tissues. Again, it's not the fluid that's inside of a cell. It's fluid that surrounds cells and tissues. All right, again, out of the 15 liters here, we see that it's approximately 12 liters. Okay, and what does this interstitial fluid consist of? Water, sugars, salts, fatty acids, amino acids, coenzymes, hormones, neurotransmitters, waste products from the cells. All right, this is where we see solute exchange from the cell, inside the cell to outside of the cell. All right, and again, interstitial fluid, its involvement here is to regulate the flow of chemicals, all right, and allows cells to function properly. So taking a look at this picture here, we see extracellular fluid, okay, or what's known as our blood here. All right, we've got molecules transporting themselves across the membrane into the interstitial fluid, and then from there they will transport inside the cell, or where the intracellular fluid is located. Again, the cell will function properly, get rid of waste, all right, export goods. Again, those those molecules will end up transporting outside of the cell into the extracellular fluid, or known as lymph. Again, the lymph connects back to our circulatory system, where these molecules will then start circulating once they have found their way back into the circulatory system. Right? Again, the blood plasma and lymph here. Blood plasma and lymph just helps to deliver molecules all around the body. Not only that, but electrolytes, sodium, potassium, calcium ions, iron. Okay, there's all sorts of different vitamins and minerals that the blood will transport to wherever it is needed. Now again, the terminology that we will be discussing here when we talk about how our kidneys will help to maintain proper water balance is called osmosis, and we've talked about this before. This is the transfer of water across membranes. And again, we know that water will travel across the membrane from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. All right, so again, these principles will be applied to not only urine formation, but also urine concentration as we discuss the function of the kidney. There's different types of osmotic environments that we can talk about: hyperosmotic, hypoosmotic, and isoosmotic. Again, hyperosmotic is a solution with a higher concentration of solute molecules than water molecules. All right, so water would want to tend to move to this side. Again, having said that, the concentration is really, really high with solute. That means that water will want to go to the side. Remember, water always travels across the membrane to the side where concentration of solute is higher. Hypoosmotic, this is where we see a solution with lower concentration of solute molecules than water molecules. Again, water will tend to move away from this side towards the hyperosmotic side. The molecules that will move towards the hypoosmotic side would be your dissolved solute. And again, we see isoosmotic, an environment here where there's equal portions of water molecules on each side of the membrane, and there's equal portions of solute molecules on each side of the membrane. Again, they are still transporting across the membrane, but we see an equilibrium between solutions on each side of the membrane. Again, these terminology, or these terms, will be used when we do discuss the function of the kidney. Now, osmoregulation. This is how the kidneys help to function, or help to maintain water balance. But not only that, help to reabsorb important molecules back into the bloodstream. All right, and we're going to talk about this terminology called osmoregulation. We'll break it down to a couple processes. But what is osmoregulation? It's the process of actively regulating the osmotic pressure of bodily fluids. Okay, so our kidneys will continually monitor not only blood volume, but also we'll take a look at total body water. Again, compare the amount of electrolytes dissolved in the blood and compare it to the amount of blood volume or water that's also in the blood. Compare the two values, and the kidneys will then start to either or make adjustments to help maintain homeostasis. And you might hear this term before. It's called an osmole. An osmole is just the total concentration of dissolved particles in solution, and the solution we're talking about here is blood. Okay. Again, when you have a dissolved solution of particles, this will contribute to osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure, and again, this has an effect on our blood pressure. Okay, and again, the kidneys will continuously monitor dissolved particles in the blood. All right. Extracellular fluid wants to equal intracellular fluid, isoosmotic. So the concentration of solute remains the same across the cellular membrane, and then water remains the same across the cellular membrane. So again, we see an isoosmotic environment here between the extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid, and these two make up our total body water. Now again, osmole of blood plasma, basically this is how much dissolved particles should be in blood plasma. We see about 275 to 295 milliosmoles per kilogram. Okay, and this is talking about osmolality. Okay, there's another term called osmolarity. It just uses another unit of measure, but it's talking about the same thing. Osmolality talks about, instead of the R there, we see an L. Okay, so osmolality. We see that osmolality is measured in milliosmoles per kilogram, and osmolarity is measured in milliosmoles per liter. Again, what we see here, and this will come into play when we start describing how molecules will become reabsorbed into the kidney as the kidney functions to help maintain water balance. The excretory system, this is the system that is responsible for maintaining water balance. A couple kidneys or a couple organs that are included here. We see the kidneys, the adrenal glands sitting on top. Okay, that's right here. The adrenal glands sitting on top. Again, the ureters, which will supply the urinary bladder with urine. Okay, so basically once the kidneys are done filtering the blood and reabsorbing water, the rest will then be sent down the ureters here into the urinary bladder, where it will be stored before it is excreted. Okay, again, this is the bladder here that will hold the urine that was formed from the kidneys, and then upon exit we see the urethra here. All right, very important structures that I would like you to know is the blood that is supplied to the kidney comes into it via the renal artery. And again, this picture I think is screwed up because it's pointing to the blue thing here, but this blue thing should be veins. Again, arteries carry blood away from the heart. Generally, arteries carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. There is one instance where arteries do not do that, but we'll talk about that in later chapters. But again, we see here that the renal artery supplies blood to the kidneys. The renal vein will bring blood from the kidneys back up to the heart, okay, where it will then become oxygenated again and then sent back out through the body. Okay, blood leaving an organ is generally deoxygenated blood, and that blood will get sent back up to the heart, where it will then get pumped through the pulmonary circuit to pick up oxygen. Basically, the kidneys are responsible for a lot of different things. Breakdown of ammonia, which occurs in the liver, the kidneys are responsible for excreting ammonia. Again, ammonia is a very dangerous molecule or a byproduct that the liver will produce as a result of the breakdown of protein. We'll discuss that in later slides. But the kidneys are responsible for excreting ammonia. Again, ammonia is quickly converted to urea in the liver because ammonia is very dangerous. And this molecule here, urea, will then be excreted through the be excreted by the kidneys. Okay. Some other metabolic waste here: carbon dioxide, bile pigments, lactic acid, and then solid waste. See the different types of organ systems that are responsible for excreting these molecules. Let's focus on the ones where the kidneys are the main organ here. Taking a look here, there is a negative feedback mechanism for helping to maintain water balance, and this negative feedback mechanism works specifically on the kidneys to reabsorb more water. So this would basically say that our electrolyte balance is off. So there is a higher concentration of electrolytes than there's supposed to be in our solution here, or in our blood. So our kidneys will monitor that. But not only that, we might have been exercising, we might not have been drinking a lot of water. Whatever the case may be, if we're excessively sweating, if we haven't been drinking water, maybe we've been drinking some sort of maybe diuretic to stop us from reabsorbing water. Whatever the case may be, what we see here is when we sweat and when we don't drink water, solute concentration will increase. Okay? At the same time, blood volume will decrease. And as a result of a decrease in blood volume, we see a drop in blood pressure. All of these things here, these three things, these are considered to be the stimulus. Okay? I'm going to ask you this on the test. And what's going to happen here is the sensor, in this case, the sensor is the osmoreceptors. Osmoreceptors are found in the hypothalamus, and osmoreceptors, they generally will pick up on an increase in solute concentration in the blood, a drop in blood volume, and as well as a decrease in blood pressure. So the osmoreceptors will send the signals to the hypothalamus here being the integrator. It will integrate this information and send out a signal to an effector. Well, that effector here is the posterior pituitary gland. We'll talk about this gland. It's part of two different, well, it is part of the pituitary gland. There's the anterior pituitary gland, there's the posterior pituitary gland. Posterior pituitary gland is basically like a tank. It holds hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus and released when needed. So again, what we see here is excessive sweating. We don't see this individual drinking enough water. So again, not only that, it messes up the concentration of solute in the blood. We see a decrease in blood volume. We see a decrease in blood pressure. We might even see a decrease in total body water. Again, the sensors here being the osmoreceptors. I put an S there for sensor. Will sense this drop and send this information to the hypothalamus, which would be the integrator. The hypothalamus will then send a signal to the posterior pituitary gland, and we'll label that E, which will then release what's known as antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone. And what antidiuretic hormone will do, it will act on the collecting ducts of the kidneys. And we'll talk about the function of kidneys, but not only that, specific structures of the kidney. But antidiuretic hormone has an effect on kidneys. And what will antidiuretic do? Well, it will increase kidneys. It'll basically tell the kidneys, hey, you need to reabsorb more water here. So instead of excreting water, the kidneys will now start to reabsorb water. And it's pretty fascinating when you start to think about all this, because this hormone came from the brain. And it's acting specifically on the kidneys here. And it's telling the kidneys, hey, reabsorb more water. So this is the effect, or the response here is we see an increase in water reabsorption. Hopefully, this increase in water reabsorption will act, well, hopefully we see an increase in blood volume, we see an increase in blood pressure, and we see a decrease in solute concentration. So whatever the response is, it's going to be the opposite of what the actual stimulus is. So instead of a decrease in blood pressure, we'll see an increase in blood pressure. Instead of a decrease in blood volume, we'll see an increase in blood volume. And instead of an increase in solute concentration, we'll see a decrease in solute concentration. And this response will act negatively on all three of these things. Having said that, as the kidneys are reabsorbing water, this will send a message to the hypothalamus and act negatively on the hypothalamus, saying, hey, we've reabsorbed enough water, we've maintained our total body water, but not only that, our blood volume. We can stop signaling the posterior pituitary gland to release ADH, which will act on the kidneys. All right, this is the negative feedback mechanism for helping to maintain water balance. Again, we take a look at this picture here. This is an interesting picture because this is exactly what we just talked about. We're dehydrated. Again, this will affect the osmolality of the plasma of the blood. Basically, we see an increased concentration of dissolved solute in our blood plasma. This will obviously be picked up by osmoreceptors. The osmoreceptors at the same time not only will send the signal to the hypothalamus, but it will also help the hypothalamus to send signals to your brain saying that you are thirsty. So again, we see two things happening here. Not only do we see ADH acting on the kidneys to reabsorb more water, we actually see our brain responding to the fact that we haven't had a drink of water in a while, and we will start to feel thirsty. And that's our brain telling us, hey, you need to start drinking water. These are the different functions of the kidneys: removes waste, balances blood pH, maintains body water balance, Okay, again, the blood is supplied to the kidney via the renal artery, and the blood that is taken away from the kidney is entered into the renal vein, which will then make its way back up to the heart. The functional unit of the kidney, is known as this interesting structure here called the nephron. Okay? And it is this cool picture here looks kind of like a roller coaster. We see blues and reds and a kind of like a goldish brown here. All right, the blues and reds, those are actually part of the circulatory system. The brown is what the nephron will look like here. Okay, and we will discuss the structure of the nephron and how each of these different regions or different structures of the nephron will help to reabsorb water, but also maintain water balance. There's two different types. There's cortical nephrons and there's juxtamedullary nephrons. Basically, each of them will help to maintain water balance. It's just that each has a different function. We see once the urine is formed by the kidney, it will then travel its way down the ureters into the bladder here. We see that the bladder can hold approximately 300 milliliters to 400 milliliters of urine. Now, before we get the sensation of we need to go to the bathroom. Again, we see that the sphincter here, all right, and there's sphincters, you know, in different regions of our body, and they're just circular pieces of muscle that will close and open based on, again, specifically talking here, this excretory system. It'll open based on us releasing the urine from the bladder. An important thing to know for the test is deamination. What deamination is the breakdown of amino acid here that occurs in the liver. Now, the reason why this is so important and for the actual urine formation in the kidney is when an amino acid is broken down in the liver, the amino group is cleaved off of the amino acid. This amino group will quickly convert to ammonia, which is toxic to the body. Now, the liver will convert this ammonia into a molecule known as urea, okay? Going through the urea cycle. Basically what happens here is we have ammonia reacting with bicarbonate and two ATP molecules forming this urea molecule here. Interestingly enough about the liver, all of the organs or most of the organs, let's say the stomach, the spleen, the small intestine, all right, the pancreas, all of these organs, when bringing blood back to the heart from those organs, that blood will make its way through what's known as the hepatic portal vein. So all of the organs, the abdominal organs that are bringing blood back to the heart, goes through this hepatic portal vein. That's where the liver will take care of all of the different types of functions that are crucial to not only the organ system function but also cellular function. Deamination is very important on the test. You need to know this, because once urea is formed by the urea cycle, it will be transported to the kidneys where excretion will occur. Something that the kidneys also do is known as the bicarbonate buffer system. All right, kidneys maintain blood pH. Again, it's all part of homeostasis. Now, what kidneys do is continuously monitor the amount of hydrogen ions and the amount of bicarbonate ions that are in the blood. Now, this is the reaction here for the buffer system. When we produce carbon dioxide as a waste, it quickly converts with, or quickly reacts with water to form this carbonic acid. Well, this carbonic acid will dissociate into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. Now, having said that, varying amounts of each of these molecules will determine the pH of the blood. And the kidneys will monitor this, and depending on if there is too much hydrogen ion or too much bicarbonate ion, the kidneys will excrete either one, depending on what's needed. There's two different things that we can talk about here in terms of the pH level. It's called acidosis and alkalosis, and this will also be on the test. You need to describe the buffer system, how it works, and not only that, you need to describe two environments in which the kidneys try to maintain homeostasis. Acidosis is when the tissues of the body are acidic. And this can result from a variety of things: poor diet, consumption of acidic foods, little to no exercise. So what happens when our body becomes acidic? Well, the kidneys will secrete hydrogen ion and reabsorb bicarbonate ion. Bicarbonate ion is the conjugate acid here. Hydrogen ion here is the conjugate base. Now, taking a look at this, when kidneys secrete hydrogen ion and reabsorb bicarbonate, the pH level will balance off. Okay? Again, our blood needs to maintain that 7.4 pH level. When our bodies are alkalosis or basic, our kidneys will do the exact opposite: secrete bicarbonate ion and reabsorb hydrogen ion. Okay? And this is in hopes of bringing the pH levels back down to 7.4. The respiratory system also comes into play here. Because carbon dioxide quickly reacts with water to form carbonic acid, the respiratory system, when we know our lungs, will expel carbon dioxide from the body. So depending on what type of environment our bodies are in, either acidosis or alkalosis, our respiratory system will expel carbon dioxide. Formation of urine. Basically, the kidneys, and we'll talk about this structure here and all of its different functions as we go through urine formation. And basically, what the kidney will do is filter all of the molecules from our blood, and that occurs here in filtration. Once filtration occurs, the nephron, or this structure here that's just part of the kidney, will go through a reabsorption process that occurs here in the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. Once we see reabsorption occurring, and this means that water is being reabsorbed and different ions are being reabsorbed, the rest can be secreted by the collecting duct here into the renal pelvis. Now, there's three processes to how the kidney will actually form urine: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. We'll talk about each of these processes and all of the different structures that occur in these three processes. Taking a look here, this is the overall process. This picture here describes it a little bit better. Filtration occurs here. We have different functions of this nephron, or this structure, which we'll talk about. You'll need to label this on the test. We see this group of different capillaries here kind of come together. This is known as the glomerulus. Again, blood is received by the glomerulus, okay, by what's known as called this afferent arteriole. Blood will then leave the glomerulus through what's known as an efferent arteriole. But the Bowman's capsule, which is something that wraps itself around the glomerulus, acts kind of as a filtering mechanism here, which, again, all of the molecules coming in through the afferent arteriole into the glomerulus will transport across the membrane and into the Bowman's capsule. This is where filtration occurs. Once filtration occurs, it'll travel down the proximal convoluted tubule, where we see reabsorption by the kidney of different molecules here, ions and as well also water. As the filtrate travels down the loop of Henle, we see water being reabsorbed here by the kidney. As we ascend the loop of Henle, we see different ions, sodium and chloride ions, being reabsorbed by the kidney. And again, as we travel through the distal convoluted tubule, we see the reabsorption of sodium and chloride ions as well as bicarbonate ion. As this filtrate becomes more concentrated, because of the reabsorption that's occurring in the loop of Henle, it will collect in the collecting duct. Again, we see more water being reabsorbed here. more water being reabsorbed. As it concentrates, it will travel down the collecting duct and into the renal pelvis, which will end up into the calyx, into the ureter, and then finally into the urinary bladder. Filtration. Again, this begins at the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. Afferent arterioles supply blood to the glomerulus, and this is where filtration occurs. Now, what are some of the molecules that will be filtered into the Bowman's capsule? Well, we see glucose, some small cations, and some small anions. Some molecules that do not transport across the membrane are red blood cells and proteins. They're larger molecules. So what happens here is most of the filtrate, mostly everything will become filtered. The only things that kind of don't become filtered are the bigger molecules like your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your platelets, your proteins. Smaller molecules like maybe amino acids, small cations, small anions, those will filter across the membrane and into the Bowman's capsule. Interesting fact, 1,400 liters of blood pass through the kidneys every day. Bowman's capsule will filter approximately 180 liters from the blood, but only 1.5 liters is excreted as urine daily. That means that after filtering occurs, the kidney will reabsorb most of the filtrate. And again, we see here that filtration process occurring between the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. As that filtrate moves its way down the proximal convoluted tubule, we see the reabsorption of different ions. Again, what we see here, the loop of Henle is mostly responsible for the reabsorption of water and ion concentration. Now, having said that, the osmolality of our blood is roughly around 300 milliosmoles per kilogram. Okay. We can see that as filtration occurs, the osmolality of that filtrate is right around 300. As it travels down the loop of Henle, we see that it increases. That means that as water is being reabsorbed by the loop of Henle, the osmolality of that filtrate will increase, becoming more hyperosmotic. And as it ascends, we see that more ions now, instead of water, will become reabsorbed by the kidney. So that hyperosmotic fluid becomes more hypoosmotic as it travels up the loop of Henle. These are important terms. And again, as the filtrate moves through the distal convoluted tubule, we see more ions being reabsorbed. Now, having said that, as the filtrate descends through the loop of Henle, water is reabsorbed via passive transport, and as the filtrate moves up through the loop of Henle, we see the ions transporting across the membrane via active transport. Very important terms to understand here. And again, as that filtrate moves into the collecting duct, we see water reabsorbed into the kidney. Now, again, what we see is ADH. Remember, ADH was that hormone. ADH acts specifically on the collecting duct to open up pores to reabsorb water when it is needed. Now, let's say we drink coffee, which is a diuretic. It will block the collecting duct from reabsorbing water, which is why we may have the sensation of going to the bathroom more after we have had a cup of coffee. Two different types of nephrons that I do want to talk about, and it's just basically their position within the kidney. Again, when you take a look at the anatomy of the kidney, there's the cortex, and then there's the medulla, the inner and outer medulla. Now, there's two types of nephrons. There's the juxtamedullary nephrons and the cortical nephrons. Our kidneys have about 20% juxtamedullary nephrons, and that means that the loop of Henle will go deep down into the medulla. And this type of nephron is responsible for urine concentration and reabsorption. The cortical nephron, which is only about 80% here, we see that it does not extend into the medulla as far as the juxtamedullary nephron. Cortical nephrons are more for excretory purposes, not for reabsorption. If we were to see, maybe take an animal that lives in the desert, that animal will probably have about 80 to 100% juxtamedullary nephrons because it depends on the reabsorption of water. And finally, secretion here. Secretion is the removal of the waste that is not reabsorbed by the kidneys. Again, we see the cortex here, and we see the medulla here. Juxtamedullary nephrons are responsible for reabsorption. Cortical nephrons are responsible for excretion. Now, it'll end up into the renal pelvis and then into the calyx here. Once inside the calyx, the fluid will now, which is urine, will drain into the ureter and down into the kidney. All right, or sorry, down into the urinary bladder. Again, this happens once reabsorption occurs. Reabsorption is very, very important, only because our kidneys will reabsorb water and ions. All right, the rest is waste. The rest is waste. And what's found in our urine? Well, detoxified poisons, water-soluble drugs, metabolites, hydrogen ions, any other material that's not needed by the body. Kidneys also regulate blood oxygen levels. Hypoxemia. Essentially what happens here is our body is not supplied with enough oxygen. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe a hemoglobin issue, maybe a red blood cell issue. Well, our kidneys will monitor the amount of oxygen that's transported inside of our body. And when there is a low level, okay, of O2, our kidneys will send a signal to the bone marrow using this hormone here called erythropoietin, or EPO. You might have heard of EPO, and you might relate it to Lance Armstrong. He used EPO to dope. Now, the reason why this puts him at an advantage is when erythropoietin stimulates the production of red blood cells. We see an increased amount of red blood cells in the circulatory system. Well, red blood cells' function is to carry oxygen. So when you can supply your muscle tissues with an increased amount of oxygen, you can train a lot longer before lactic acid buildup. All right, so taking a look at this, kidneys will signal bone marrow to stimulate red blood cell production via this erythropoietin, or EPO hormone. Once that occurs, we see an increase in red blood cell count. Increased red blood cell count obviously increases the amount of oxygen transport in the circulatory system. And finally, there's two different types of diseases. These are more generalized. There's acute and chronic, and this will lead to renal failure. All right, renal failure is the kidneys not being able to function anymore. Now, there's two types. Acute, this is the rapid loss of renal function, and this could occur by maybe a car accident or a fight. You got hit in the kidney, maybe from a sport injury, something that happens very fast and it's very progressive. Again, chronic here, we see a slow progressive. This could be caused from diabetes, maybe high blood pressure, polycystic kidney disease, which is a genetic disease here causing cysts to build up on the kidneys. Again, I'm not going to go into any specific type of disease. These are two different generalized types of diseases. All right, treatments, obviously dialysis, which is a machine that acts like your kidneys and it filters your blood for you, and then it will, once it filters the blood here, it will put the blood back into the body. And again, kidney transplant is also another option if we see that both kidneys aren't functioning or they are both in failure. If you have a potential donor match, a kidney transplant is always a possibility. Please review these slides. What I would like you to do is know the anatomy of the kidney. So I'd like you to label the anatomy of the kidney. Not only that, the actual structure of the nephron. The nephron is very important for not only filtering the blood, but also reabsorbing all of the good molecules, okay, or useful molecules, again, water and ions. I would also like you to know the kidneys and how it maintains pH levels. All right. acidosis, alkalosis, but also the bicarbonate buffer system and how the kidneys help to maintain proper blood pH levels. I'd also like you to know the negative feedback loop that kidneys use to help reabsorb water when blood pressure is low, blood volume is low, and there's an increased osmolality, so basically a high concentration of solute in the blood. These are very important topics that that you will see on the test. Please review these slides, please take your own notes, and ask me questions when you come to class.